What's going on, everyone? On today's show, I have Chris and Joe with me. We're breaking down the 2025 wide receiver class, all the rookies. We're breaking down their upside, floor plays, where we think they're going to go, and NFL comps. It's an episode you definitely do not want to miss. So here we go.
Welcome to the Heroes of Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Heroes of Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Matt High, joined tonight by Chris Felice and Joe Capozzi. We have a really fun episode tonight. We're talking about the rookie wide receivers heading into the NFL draft. Now, your NFL rookie drafts are going to be starting up very, very soon. So we're going to break down all the guys that you should know, which ones have upside, which ones you should stay away from, and which ones we need to know where they're going to be, where they're playing, and potentially what position they're going to be playing. So that's a little tease for Travis Hunter. We still don't know. We probably won't know until the draft. So, gentlemen, we're still running that contest, so let's shout that out really quick. All you need to do to enter that contest is go down to the comments section below, like, share, subscribe, and just drop just a team name, a fun team name that you thought of. Could be funny, could be serious, whatever you want. We're going to compile a list of all of them. We're going to rank them, and we're going to decide them. You have until the NFL draft. So if you want to be entered into that, we're selecting two winners, and they get a full Dynasty roster review from all of us here at the podcast. We'll go through your strengths, your weaknesses, what moves you should potentially be making, what picks and players might be associated with those, if you should move on from some guys. Basically, just a full review of everything to help you go from maybe middling to a contender this year. If you want to do that, just do all that below. We're excited to see what you guys have to come up with. So, all right, gentlemen, why don't we just dive right into our rookies? First one is going to be Tet McMillan out of Arizona. 6'4", 219 pounds. In 2024, he had 84 receptions for 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns. Joe, I want to hear from you first. Tet McMillan, is he going to be the very first wide receiver off the board in Dynasty rookie drafts? And do you think the same for the NFL draft?
He should definitely be the first wide receiver off any Dynasty draft. I don't know about the NFL draft because Travis Hunter is there, but then again, we don't know what's happening with Travis Hunter as far as a fantasy perspective. So the first fantasy wide receiver off the board should be Tet. He just looks really good. I mean, you can't go wrong with a 6'5" wide receiver. He has the skill set to make it in the NFL, and that's why I would take him as, if you need a wide receiver, Tet's the guy to grab in the rookie draft.
Chris, year one as a rookie, what is he going to be? Top 12, top 24? Could he be a Brian Thomas Jr., Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson type player? Or are we thinking more T. Higgins type?
It's obviously a little hard to tell now because landing spots, of course, matter. So I'm gonna go with like a floor, so to speak. This floor the ceiling could change depending where he goes, but I think a reasonable floor for Tet is going to be top 15. I think that's somewhat reasonable. He's probably not going to go to the best team in the world because he'll be probably taken pretty early by a team that's very needed at that position. But with that said, with how many teams are kind of in this rebuild mode, and we've already seen a couple rebuilds go pretty well within like a short time frame. I think a top 15 for someone as talented as Tet is not exactly too out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, for me, I'm probably going to be against consensus here, but he's not my wide receiver one in the class just because the profile of a wide receiver that I look for Dynasty is slightly different. Like, I like the boom bust guys, but I prefer more possession guys that are getting a bunch of targets. When I was watching his film, he was good. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking anything away from him. 1,300 yards as a college wide receiver and 8 touchdowns. Dude can ball. My thing with him is I don't know if everything is going to translate as well as many people think to the NFL. You can do really well in college, and in the NFL, you could kind of fall to the wayside a little bit. Again, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I did see some struggles with separation, similar to George Pickens. That's been my gripe against him basically since he came out. But I mean, he's going to be a red zone threat. 6'4", 219, big body wide receiver. He's going to be a good pick. So my comp for him was actually Michael Pittman Jr., who I know Anthony Richardson kind of destroyed his value, but he was still a good wide receiver. He's a good wide receiver just in a bad situation, which, if we're kind of talking about it, we think he could not maybe fall into a position that he's not with the best team, doesn't have the best quarterback play, which is what I saw in college. That kind of held him back a little bit. He could have had an even bigger stat line if he had a little bit more competent quarterback play. There was a lot of times where the ball was hitting the dirt or just wasn't accurate with the throw and he had to adjust and he couldn't adjust for it. But that's really it. I think he should be a top 2 wide receiver in this class. It just depends on landing spot. If I'm willing to give him the first wide receiver pick off the board for me, or there's another guy I like a little bit better. Just because I think he's going to translate to the NFL a lot easier, which is something I'd look at. So I know you guys probably think I'm crazy, but we'll figure it out. Next guy up here, I want to talk about Emeka Egbuka, who is my wide receiver 1 of the class. Now, comes from Ohio State, 6'1", 202 pounds, 65 receptions, 824 yards, and 9 touchdowns in 2024. Chris, I want to throw it out to you first. You like Tet over Emeka Egbuka, correct?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. If you had to choose one of the guys, let's say Emeka Egbuka goes to a situation like, we'll say the Chargers, and Tet goes to a middling team, the Panthers or something. Which player do you think? Does that change anything for you as far as talent versus opportunity, or no?
No. I think the Chargers might be a bad comparison there because I think Ladd McConkey is better than Egbuka, and I'd rather have the wide receiver 1 than a wide receiver 2 on a team. I don't believe that Ladd McConkey is good enough to. I'm going to compare this to the Bengals, right? The Bengals have Jamar Chase and T Higgins, and we're talking about how prolific they were as a duo. That's because, in part, of how good each of them are. Jamar Chase is fantastic, which opens up the road for T Higgins. I think Ladd McConkey is a good player, but I don't think he's anywhere near good enough to open that enough of a road for another player to also be within a top 15 finishing spot. So I don't exactly know if the Chargers would be a good place. I don't mind if he went to the Panthers, funny enough, because I think Bryce Young isn't exactly completely out of it yet. And he would definitely be the wide receiver 1 on that team without question. I think if Egbuka went to the best possible situation and Tet went to like a horrible situation, I can't even think about it in my head like what that would be. If I'm being honest with you, then yes, I might like Egbuka over Tet, but I think that's a very, very thin line at the moment. I think there's like I said, I can't even think of teams that would occur under. I'm going to be honest with you. So if you have any thoughts, if you have any teams that you can think off the top of your head, go for it. But I don't think the Panthers Chargers one would sway me in any way. I think I would still keep my cards to my chest.
Looking
there.
right now I'm on NFL.com. They're one of their latest mock drafts. They have Tet going to the Seahawks,
Okay.
like pretty much to replace DK Metcalf, and Emeka Egbuka going to Dallas. For me, I prefer to have Egbuka in that situation. Either way, I mean, I'm probably not the best. So Joe, let's talk about that one. Which one in that situation? Which way are you, talent over opportunity, or what?
I'm always drafting talent over opportunity. Teams are always going to be changing. If a player is good, and they'll find opportunity elsewhere in the NFL on different teams, or other guys will come in to be surrounded with better talent, and then they will improve in the long run. You can't draft. I'm not saying that Ibuka is bad, but I think Tet is better, and I'd rather have the best available player, even if the situation's bad. I mean, I took Neighbors last year. He went to Daniel Jones. Was
That
that
is
a good
true.
situation? No. But now look, he still did pretty well. And now look, now he has Jameis Winston, and next year he's probably going to have a brand new rookie wide receiver thrown to him. So, or a quarterback thrown to him. So it's just always draft talent. In my opinion, don't I would never draft based off a situation, at least in a dynasty rookie perspective.
I mean, looking at the way Jameis plays football, they could end up saying, let's just throw a wide receiver to throw you the ball. He might be throwing to himself at some point during the season. But I just want to pause really quick. As a Giants fan, thank you for signing Jameis Winston. I'm gonna have so much fun watching the Giants this year. They're not gonna be good. They're gonna suck. But at least now we get to have some fun watching Jameis interviews in New York with all the lights and the cameras on them and just throwing YOLO balls down the field to Neighbors. It's gonna be fantastic. So thank you. We're gonna
Are
lose
we
a lot
talking
of
about wide
games.
receivers right now?
We are, but I just wanted to throw that
Yeah.
out there because Jameis is the most fantasy friendly quarterback in the entire league. All right. He does not care. It's just chuck the ball up. Someone's down there somewhere. Oh, wait. Whoops. It's the other team. Now we're going to throw even more. All right. Let's get back on track here. Luther Burden, the third, is coming in as our next wide receiver out of Missouri. 6 foot, 206 pounds, 61 receptions for 676 yards and 6 scores. 4.41 40-yard dash. He's been comped by most to Debo Samuel and Golden Tate, which those two names are awesome. He's going to be one of the most polarizing wide receivers because some people are putting him as number one just because the skill set he has. He's like just a yak guy. He can create and separate. He can create in space. I had a lot of fun watching his tape and I really enjoyed it. He, I think, is going to be one of these guys that translates extremely well into the NFL, which he could be one of these guys that takes down Tet as the number one wide receiver. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on Luther Burden? How high do you think his ceiling could be?
It could be really high. I mean, I think he kind of got humbled a little bit. I mean, he had a really good sophomore year in college, and then his junior year after that was a little bit lackluster to say the least. But then again, the entire offense of the team was a little bit more lackluster that year. So I don't put it all on him of just having a bad year. So I still think he has the talent to make it in the NFL. It's just unfortunate that he's coming out in the same class as Ibuka and Tet because he could be up there. I don't know if he'd be a wide receiver one for me over a lot of these guys, but he's definitely I'd say like a wide receiver two in the draft. Ibuka's been climbing rankings because a couple months back he was a little bit further down the rankings, and now we have Ibuka at number two in a lot of boards, and then Burden right there at number three. But he's a first round rookie fantasy wide receiver. Definitely talented player. As you said, we watched some tape. He looked really good. So I'm excited to see where he goes and what sort of situation he finds himself in.
Chris, is there any situation where he would be the number one wide receiver you'd be drafting this year?
Hmm. Um, Probably not. No. Uh, yeah, no. I don't think there's and out of all 32 teams, I don't think there's going to be a single like. There's not a team I can say that's like, oh yeah, you take him, and I immediately want him over the other two before it. Not to say that he is bad by any means, but while I don't know if it's always to Joe's point, I think most of the time drafting the talent over the situation is usually correct. There are probably times where it's not as correct, very few times. But I think for the most part, that's generally how the thought process should go to a certain extent. When you're comparing it that, because in a dynasty perspective, there will be team restructurings, people retiring, injuries, in and outs of however many players occur. Right, there are so many variables, and at the end of the day, the age is probably the best and consistent variable that will keep someone in the game for the longest amount of time. And it's the one variable you can bet on the most. In regards to that, um, I don't know if, maybe I'll say this. Depending on the situation, I would draft Burden over Egbuka. Maybe he might upgrade to them too. I think Bird and Egbuka are very close to each other. In fact, both their floors, in my opinion, are the same. With their floors being a top, I would say around 24 wide receiver, depending on landing spot. That will change. Um, that's kind of how I view them. That's not saying they're bad anyway. I just think that they're more volatile because of wherever they land. So I
Gotcha.
think that's kind of how I view it. I view them very close together in terms of talent, in my opinion. But Tet is definitely the one there that if you have the ability to draft, you're gonna probably draft them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, going back to Tech quick, with his size and speed and everything, he has the potential to basically be one of the biggest wide receivers we've seen. Immediate fantasy impact. It's just the way I look is a little bit different. I want guys that are going to not rely solely just on red zone and solely on 50-50 balls and things. Like I like more the route running style guys, which Luther Burden is one of those guys. Emeka Egbuka is definitely one of those guys. Um, so next guy here is Matthew Golden out of Texas. He had some awesome combine. Running the gauntlet drill, he was seamless. It was like darn near perfect. Kind of reminded me of the way Puka Nakua kind of ran it, and everyone's like, "Whoa, that was really good." Um, he also had the fastest 40 time out of the wide receivers. Um, he is 5'11", 191. 41 receptions, 625 yards, and 8 scores in this past season. More of a slender guy. He's going to most likely be a slot wide receiver, but he runs decent routes. I think he's going to be one of the guys that could be a good value this year in drafts. I see him mostly at the late first, early second round pick in dynasty rookie drafts currently. Obviously, that could change with landing spot, but as far as Matthew Golden, Chris, what do you think his floor could be in fantasy?
His floor right now, in my opinion, is probably top 25.
Okay.
That's very dependent on landing spot. We're getting to the point where that matters a lot more, and that's kind of where I'm putting it there. We're at the point now where the floor could also change. Like for the first three, they probably won't change too drastically. Right? This one very, very much could change, and the ceiling could also be put pretty decently. I don't think it's going to be near the top 10 or anything, but I think a top 25 receiver in this scenario, I think makes sense given the impressive stuff from the combine. Uh, perhaps finding form within the NFL. This is kind of like where uh, we get to the point where we look at the big guys up front. You have like Luca, Tet, Burden, but then you kind of like come back down here and it's like, oh well, you know what? I mean, like last year you had Bryce Thomas Jr., Lad McConkey. I mean, they ain't no Marvin Harrison Jr. What happened to him? Hello. So I'm not saying Marvin Harrison Jr. is bad, by the way. I'm just saying like we get to this kind of like frisky motion where there's definitely opportunity, um, but it's definitely kind of not as bright as the others.
All right, Joe, I got a question here for you. Looking at a wide receiver in the NFL currently versus Matthew Golden, would you rather have Mike Evans for potentially one, maybe 2 more years, or Matthew Golden?
It really depends on the team situation. Matthew Golden is a young, promising rookie wide receiver, where Mike Evans is a proven GOAT, but he is also up there in age. So it's if your team's also up there in age, and maybe you're looking to try to win a couple more, like 2 more years before you start seriously diving into a rebuild, I'd probably go Evans. But if your team's kind of in the middle or you're towards the end and you're just kind of in a rebuild mode, obviously take Golden.
All right. Now, one more, and then we'll move on here. Jaden Reed on the Packers or Matthew Golden? Younger wide receiver, looked pretty good, had some struggles, but the offense also had struggles. Which shot are you looking to take here?
So this is where it falls more to your point of situation because they're both pretty close in age. Um, Personally, I think I'm more towards Reed because we've seen him and we know what he can do. Golden we haven't seen yet in the NFL, but fastest wide receiver in the class, as you said, he's a big deep threat. In the right situation, it could be Golden over Reed for sure.
Okay, yeah, that's I agree. I would go Jane Reed just because you know going back to our dynasty draft tips, the episode that Chris and I did, that was one of the things. Situation matters, but sometimes it's better to have the proven asset versus the unknown because every time you take a shot, every pick, there's not a single pick in any draft class that is safe, that is going to hit. There's always a chance that it's not going to hit. We know that very well because a lot of our picks unfortunately end up missing. Uh, as a dynasty manager, you win some, you lose some. You make a bet, it don't work out. So that's kind of where I lean. I'd prefer to have what I know versus what I don't know. Helps me sleep at night, I guess. I don't know. But next guy here, I want to talk about Tre Harris out of Ole Miss. He's 6'2", 205 pounds. In 2024, he had 60 receptions, 1,030 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Did not participate in the combine. Has been comped to Michael Thomas and Allen Robinson, which those might not be the best names as of late, but at one time they were very, very good. Current draft stock is early to mid second round pick. So, Chris, I want to start with you. Tre Harris. What is there any chance he could creep into the top three or top four picks in your rookie draft this year?
There's always top three, probably not, but overtaking Golden, there's always a chance. There's always, in reality, there's always a chance for everything, right? Truthfully, there is always a chance. It also depends on when your draft is, right? Let's kind of make that apparent. Like, for instance, we have our draft in May, right? And if that's the case, these rankings might not change that much. But if your draft is closer to the actual starting of the league, a lot of stuff is going to come out by then, and very, very likely a lot of the rankings are going to change based on where stuff lands, how they sound, and how we hear they're doing in practice, so on and so forth. Very, very likely, some of these will shift, and Tre Harris and Golden, I think, are two likely candidates that could flip up. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying that if there were any flippage, that's where I would think that would happen. I don't think he's going to break into the top three by any means, but there's always a chance that we hear that he is a savant on the field and his quarterback loves him and he has ousted the other wide receivers and they all bow to him in the locker room, yada yada yada. There's a chance. I'm not saying yes, but but yeah, technically there's a chance.
Yeah, I had him comp to Gabe Davis, just the way his play style, which you could say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but Gabe Davis at one time was a lot of fun to have. Joe, what are your thoughts on Tre?
I think he looks good. I mean, the one thing that makes me nervous with Trey is that uh, he looks more of like a burst guy than a speed guy per se. So that's the only downside that I could really see to him in the NFL, and that's kind of why he's a little bit further down my rankings than some of these other guys that we're talking about. Like Chris said, though, it really all depends on the situation. I feel like in a lot of rookie drafts we see that some of the top prospects that everyone's all hyped about, they come out and they end up doing kind of lackluster, and some of these like mid to end round guys just pop off. Lad McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr. Like they were at the top. None of them were really number ones on people's draft boards, but they had some of the best seasons in the NFL. So it really all depends on how they transition into the NFL, and I think he definitely has the makings to do it in the NFL. But we have to see where he goes and what he does.
Yeah, I mean every year it seems like those guys are getting propped up. maybe for the wrong reasons, but then like you should look at like there's been a lot of value picks over the past couple seasons. I mean Justin Jefferson alone, he was like the 107 in our league. So you can find value. It just depends on what the situation is and how risk averse you are and where you sit in the draft. There's so many examples that we can mention about just finding these studs that are late, that are left for dead. You don't expect anything to happen, then boom, they're like a top 12 wide receiver in Dynasty after one season or maybe even two seasons. So they're every receiver is going to have a place in your rookie draft, and you should look at every single one of them as having that potential. Just depends on how comfortable you are with sacrificing maybe someone else you like or don't like. Push them up and down how you see fit. Next guy here I want to bring up is Travis Hunter out of Colorado, 6 foot, 188 pounds. Is he going to be a wide receiver? Is he going to be a cornerback? We do not know. He went into the combine, I believe, listed as a cornerback, but he wants to play both positions. Personally, I don't think an NFL franchise is going to allow him to do that because look how many people get injured. They're not going to be like, yeah, we want you. You're a big part of both sides of the ball. So if you get injured, not only do we have to replace you on the offensive side of the ball, we also have to replace you on the defensive side of the ball. So I think he's going to be forced to choose. I think he leans wide receiver, but we'll see. Last year, 92 receptions for 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns. Had a really good year. So, Joe, let's assume he is a wide receiver. He's not going to be allowed to play cornerback. Obviously, in the NFL draft, there's talks of him being the number 2 or possibly number 3 pick, but definitely in the top 4. I haven't seen him fall out of that. Is there any situation where he might jump into being a top 1 or 2 wide receiver ahead of Emeka Egbuka or Luther Burden or Tet McMillan?
Absolutely. If right now he was saying, if it was just clear knowledge he's going to be a wide receiver in the NFL, he'd be probably, I don't know if he'd be above Tet, but he'd be probably right between 10 and Ibuka for me. But I've seen a lot of things that a majority of the NFL GMs have all indicated that he is primarily going to play center back with like 10 to 15 snaps at wide receiver per game. And if I'm a fantasy manager, I'm not spending a first round draft pick on a wide receiver that's going to play 10 to 15 snaps at wide receiver. If you're in an IDP league, maybe a little more intriguing to get him, but at least in our league where we don't have IDP, he's a second round pick for me.
Now, Chris, let's say he does go wide receiver. Let's say he goes to the Browns. What are your thoughts with him there?
Like specifically on the Browns?
Yeah, because which one of the top 4 picks do you think you would like his value to be better on? So we got Browns, Giants, and Patriots.
I'm actually thinking about this. As a wide receiver, I prefer if he went to the Patriots.
I think that'd be a good landing spot for him if he did.
I think that's ideal, given where they're at in that rebuild, in that franchise. In terms of Travis Hunter, like in general, I think as a wide receiver, I think he's good. I do. Like as a player, as a wide receiver, I 100%. If he, as Joe was saying, if he 100% went out and said, "I am a wide receiver," he would immediately, in my opinion, probably be above Ibuka on the lists there. I don't know if he would overtake Tet, mostly because I have a weird feeling that I know we're saying if he was a wide receiver, but I have a weird feeling that like my head cannot get around the fact that he's going to want to play both sides of the ball, and I feel like that someone's going to let him do that. Not saying that's a bad thing per se. I just think it's going to happen. It will obviously take away reps from the offensive side, so that's like kind of my concern. Um, in that area. But I think if he was just a pure wide receiver, he's at least the number 2. He could overtake Tet as the number 1. maybe. There are definitely some flaws, but they are not catastrophic enough to could not be worked out by an expert NFL trainer when he finally gets into the league.
I got one more question for both of you, and then we can move on. Quick couple seconds. Where would you feel comfortable? We're not going to know what he's going to be. If he's going to be a wide receiver, specifically cornerback, or do both. Where in drafts are you willing to take the risk that he will play both or be a cornerback? Because, I mean, he's costing a first-round pick right now. And he probably still will, because they're not going to know. Unless they come out in draft and say, this is what he is. By the time your rookie drafts start, you may have this question and not have the answer. So, Joe, let's start with you. Where are you comfortable taking him?
Second round, maybe 2.3 and back. There's just too many good running backs in this class. There's a couple nice tight end prospects in terms of a wide receiver that, especially if you're not an IDP league, a wide receiver that's going to play 10 to 15 snaps a game, pass. But he is such a good player that I would take the shot at him in the second round.
Yeah, you're probably not getting him based on ADP right now. So, Chris, where do you think?
That's fine. I'm passing then.
Yeah, I'm in somewhere. I think I'm gonna avoid a little bit more. I'd go like middle of the pack in the second, anywhere after. Maybe even honestly a little later. Really depends on who kind of falls to me, depending on like the league I'm in and what I need. Per se, I'm only taking Travis Hunter. If I don't need anything else, at that area, and I'm willing to make that coin flip that maybe he does play cornerback, and he goes, I actually kind of want to play wide receiver. That's kind of my thought process. I think he's talented enough to kind of go through those emotions. And I think a team that is picking him will probably understand that that is a scenario that could occur. Right. And so they should be able to adapt to that sort of motion. If they don't, that's really that's on the team, because they know that they have a player that can play one of those two positions. They should be able to be prepared to be like, okay, well, if you want to play the other position, we can kind of slot that in there to an extent. I'm not saying it would probably hurt the team, but yeah.
Looking at Fantasy Pros ADP currently, in Superflex, he's the 201, and in Standard, one quarterback, he is the 112. Is that too rich for your blood? For both of you?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just too much unknown. There's too many good players in this draft to take this shot on a player that could be nothing almost. So
now, if you're in an IDP league, it's very worth it all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Very, very worth it.
And he's
definitely
climbing boards.
Yeah, definitely much more worth the risk, no matter where he ends up playing. Because if he does end up playing, like Joe was saying before, maybe 10 or 12 snaps at wide receiver, and then the rest of it's playing CB, I think that's actually perfect, because more than half the time, those 10 or 12 slaps, one of them might end up being a touchdown as like a little trick surprise play. That's usually how teams like that would operate, right? Or as like some big play, right? You're not just gonna bring someone like that in and be like, oh yeah, check down. No, it's probably not gonna happen, right? You'd have to imagine. So I would feel more inclined to do that. In fact, I would say that he would maybe be the number 2 overall in that sense if you're an IDP league, if that's kind of how that ends up being, and he would definitely overtake Tet in that scenario.
Potentially, yeah, I agree. I think we kind of beat that horse, so we're gonna move on here. Basically, we're gonna have to figure out what he's gonna be, and a lot is gonna depend on that. And you may not have answers, so I think it's worth the pick. I would be paying a 201, or I'd be paying a late first, because at that point you're at the end of the draft. Every pick has a chance of missing, so I would be taking that. But that's just
draft. End of the draft at the first round.
Well, what I'm saying is, you have 12 teams, so chances are, if you have the 112, you won last year. Your team's probably good. That might be worth the risk to get a potential difference maker, a young difference maker that you can have on your roster for a couple more years. But again, team situation depends on a lot. Next guy up here, we have the next Bond, Isaiah Bond. So was that 008, I guess we'll call him. Out of Alabama, 5'11", 180 pounds. So smaller stature, smaller frame. Only had 32 receptions for 510 yards and 5 scores this year. He came out and said he was going to beat the 40-time record that was set last year by Xavier Worthy. Um, that didn't really happen. He ran a 4.39. I know he said that he could do a lot better, but if you're going to talk, you got to back it up, because talk is talk. Talk is cheap. I didn't really like what I saw. I think his ceiling is pretty low for fantasy. He does have some traits, but for me, he's more of a flex wide receiver. He was utilized in the red zone in motion, which is, I think, where he would be best on a team that does motion a lot. I think the Rams, they put their wide receivers in motion a ton, but I just don't see the fantasy appeal. He's a mid to late second round pick currently. He seems more of like a gadget type wide receiver, which he's gonna have a ton of boom bust games. He'll have a couple 2 touchdown games probably, but he's also gonna have a couple like 2 for 20 yard games. So, do either of you like Isaiah Bond enough to kind of take a shot at him in drafts?
Well, you go first, Chris.
Yeah, sure. I will. Um, yes and no. Depends on where I get him. I think Isaiah Bond is the boomer bust candidate of the draft, in my opinion. I think this is like the one where you don't know what's going to happen here. Right now his ADP is mid to late second. I think that's like fine. Like if I get him in the late second, I don't know about mid second, but if I get like a late second, opportunity to grab him, uh, I think I'd be willing to take that risk. Depending, obviously, of course, on landing spot. We're gonna talk about that a lot, I'm sure. No, it's very obviously dependent, but I think like this is like kind of like we're getting to the point where the receivers are like the floor is so low here that like everything's risky, right? So it's in reality, it's always about how pro days, combines, and of course where they ended up will matter infinitely more now than their actual skill, unfortunately, because that's kind of we have to now see how they can adjust into the league after they land somewhere. So I think it's worth the risk, and I would maybe take it, but there are also other people I'd be looking at as well in that area.
What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, he's an athletic guy. He had a pretty injury-filled season last year, but he's athletic. But I mean, after his attitude, talking all that smack about running the fast, beating the record, and then running pretty slow. There's a lot of other wide receiver prospects from this class that I would rather over him. There's even one that we haven't talked about yet that I think is miles above him. So I'd take a shot at him, maybe like a late second, third round. But he's again a shot in the dark. Could be something, could not be something. Definitely other more exciting guys that we're going to talk about.
Yes, and we're going to talk about one of those guys right now, because this guy is the guy that I think is my favorite target this year based on value and potential upside. So Elic Ayomanor, I probably butchered that and I apologize. Out of Stanford, 6'2", 206, 63 receptions, 801 yards, and 6 touchdowns last year. Not the fastest wide receiver, ran a 4.44 40. It's a lot of fours. It's like a tongue twister. But just watching him on film, man, I was so impressed. He is so smooth in his routes. He was heavily targeted in that offense. He was just one of these guys that he's going to be able to find himself into a good situation. No matter what team he is on, I think I'm willing to take a shot. He could be the third wide receiver, and I think the talent that he has is going to get him into the starting roster. and to be a big focal point of an offense. I'm getting huge Amon-Ra St. Brown vibes. Not as far as skill set, just more of, left for dead in the draft and for an NFL roster. And then look at him now. Like, it's just lightning in a bottle. And if you get it, look at the Lions. He was a huge part of their success. And from day one, I see that potential with this guy. So, Joe, is this the guy you were talking about just now with Isaiah Bond?
This is the guy. Well, not talk about Isaiah Bond, but talk
Yeah,
about Elic. Yeah.
yeah,
Not let's set this straight. I'm talking about Elic, not Bond. But
yeah.
yeah,
We're not talking about
he looks
008.
yeah, yeah. He looks really good. I mean, he was like a really good player on a pretty lackluster college team, and I liked what I've seen of him on tape. He's big and physical, and the only thing he has to work on, I think, is he had a couple drops, but I think if he cleans that up, and he's gonna, he looks really good. I think he's gonna, depending on what team he goes to, and even as you said, even if he goes to a bad team, I think he can make something happen, even on a bad team, which is kind of exciting, especially for a wide receiver's prospect. So I like him. He's up there in my wide receivers. I think I'd say he's like a top 5, top 6 for me in this class. So
I wish I had seconds in this class because that's where you're going to have to pay to get him, and I only have thirds. So, if anyone in our league is watching, send me seconds, please, because I
Do you
want this
have
dude on my
thirds?
team. I
I
have
think I
one.
have
I
your
have one.
third.
Yeah, you do. I have one third. But, Chris, what do you think about Elic?
I think it's good. I think, like I said, we're getting to the point where it's very iffy. I'm not like that over the moon like you guys are, but I think he's more safe than Bond. I would probably
100%.
swap. I would probably swap the two on this list here. I think he definitely has the opportunity to kind of definitely cement himself as a wide receiver two on a team. Like this is kind of like the candidate of like, oh yeah, if there was going to be a T Higgins in the class, a solid wide receiver two over the years on a team, this is probably the closest you're going to get so far. Not saying that he doesn't have the opportunity to become a wide receiver one somewhere. I'm just saying like this is kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking T Higgins, Jalen Waddle, stuff of that stature, in my opinion. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to group all these guys together now. Let me know if you guys think any of these guys are worth a pick, if they have upside or if they're more just low floor guys. Xavier Restrepo out of Miami, 5'10", 209 pounds. Jalen Royals out of Utah, 6', 205 pounds. And Tez Johnson out of Oregon, 5'10", 154. I I'm going to be on record. I don't think Tez is going to work in the NFL. It's really hard to be that small and work as a full-time player. He could have a couple plays, maybe he gets some work as a, punt returner or kick returner, just because he's pretty shifty. But as far as an NFL wide receiver and a fantasy wide receiver, I'm kind of out. Any of those guys that you think you'd be willing to take a shot on a little bit earlier than maybe some?
Restrepo. I think I agree with you on Tez. I think Jalen Royals is like fringe in that scenario, maybe. But Xavier is definitely somebody I'm like looking at. I'm like, okay, like I'm not comparable to um sorry, brain fart. And like Bond in that scenario, perhaps a little boom and bust. I could probably put him there. I'd be okay taking that risk there.
What about you, Joe?
they're all kind of like late round shots in the dark for me. I mean, one person I'd probably take over them is Jaden Higgins, but um these three guys, yeah, they're second round picks for me, maybe thirds, and depending on if they develop, they could develop, but none of them over any other one, pretty much.
Gotcha. And we're gonna do the running back breakdown show this week as well, so stay tuned for that. That basically the running back class is the reason why some of these guys get pushed down where they could be huge values because this is a very good running back class. I know we're probably going to disagree on a couple guys, but it's fine. That's why we're here. But it just seems it's not a really big tight end class. I mean, no class really is. Even the ones that were, turns out they're probably not. Quarterbacks are a little bit iffy. We did that show the other day, so check that out as well. But the running backs is where this class gets its name. And there's a lot of them, and they all have a lot of upside. Some have a higher floor, so we're going to get into those. But yeah, I think that's going to wrap things up for us on the wide receivers. We want to know what your favorite wide receivers are. So go in the comment section below. You can like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us out. We appreciate it. If it wasn't for everyone watching and listening, we wouldn't be doing this. But it's a lot of fun kind of giving you advice and helping you, build a dynasty roster. And we're gonna be here throughout the redraft season as well. We're not going anywhere. We're working on a lot of things behind the scenes. So this podcast will be changing slightly, but it will be getting better, bigger and better. We'll kind of touch base on those as they come out. We have a couple announcements we're waiting to drop on everyone, so stay tuned. But if no one else has anything else, I think we're ready to roll. We'll catch everyone on the running back episode this week. So, as always, stay tuned. Have fun. See you later.
And